Hey guys, tonight we begin with a slow breath and a softer pace. Dim the lights, pull the blanket over your shoulders, and let the buzz of the day step politely outside. If you want, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I imagine a constellation of sleepy dots around the world, connected by curiosity and very average pillows. If this kind of quiet history keeps you company, feel free to subscribe. There will be more nights like this. Many more. We're floating to Pompeii, and yes, we're going there. Not the postcard ruins, not the silent stones and school field trip version. We're stepping into an industry that most textbooks treat like a red-faced footnote. Sex work. Open, organized, profitable. Embedded in the city's daily life like bread ovens and wine shops. It's not about shock. It's about how economies actually run and how people survive inside them. We'll be gentle. We'll be careful. No graphic detail, just the slow walk through rooms that still remember voices. First, let the city breathe around you. It's a hot afternoon in late summer. Pompeii is not a museum. It's alive. The streets hum. Shop awnings throw strips of shade over stone. Bakers slide loaves onto wooden peels. A cart rattles past, mules wearing bells, because modest flair is still flair. There's the clean, warm smell of fresh bread, the stubborn tang of fish sauce brewing in jars, and underneath it all, the mineral breath of Vesuvius, like the earth has a temperament, and you should probably keep an eye on it. Money moves here. The port pulls in ships and sailors with pockets to empty. Traders from the Bay of Naples pass through. Villas nearby eat money and produce money. Wine, oil, garum, textiles. Pompeii sits on crossroads, and crossroads tend to sprout businesses that meet straightforward human needs: food, drink, sleep, gossip, and the more intimate transactions that every society regulates, shames, tolerates, and profits from in increasingly creative combinations. Rome, being Rome, did all of the above, sometimes at the same time. If you walked down a busy street then, you wouldn't have to guess what some shops offered. The city was helpfully labeled. Phallic markers carved in paving stones, painted signs, fresco panels above doorways. Not all were explicit advertisements. Romans also loved apotropic symbols because warding off bad luck with bold imagery was basically a national hobby. But the visual language was clear. You could read the neighborhood without asking awkward questions. Aediles, the city officials, tolerated and sometimes taxed all this, not because they were libertines, but because systems prefer predictability. If something will happen anyway, the Roman solution was to number it, price it, and keep it out of the forum on festival days.
Now a small step inside, a modest tavern near the Stabian baths. Clay lamps, a counter with embedded dolia, large jars holding wine and olives, a chalked price board. In the back, a curtained doorway to rooms where a different menu applies. The owner is a woman whose name turns up in election graffiti along the street, Asalina. She's a known figure from archaeology, and her business looked like a microcosm of the city's entertainment economy: food, drink, company, and behind-the-curtain privacy for those who wanted it. Her staff show up in painted notices supporting local candidates, which tells you two things. One, politics was everywhere. Two, successful proprietors had influence. When your tavern feeds half the neighborhood and your upstairs rooms keep business travelers in a good mood, people return your calls. Let's say hello to a few people with names that reached us, and a few whose outlines we can respectfully sketch from the evidence. There's Novelia Primigenia, sometimes called the Beauty of Nola, in the scribbles of admirers. Was she a celebrated courtesan, a clever brand, or just the subject of enthusiastic fans with sharp styluses? The truth lives somewhere between graffiti and ledgers. There's also an Iris who appears in marks on a wall as a business runner, likely a freedwoman who managed a handful of rooms like a compact hotelier, selling safety and discretion along with the obvious. And then there's the Lupanar, the purpose-built brothel whose small cells have been photographed 1,000 times. It's 2 stories, narrow, with a corridor of cubicles off each side. The walls carry paintings, not for art appreciation night, but as visual menus, because not everyone reading them had Latin, and not everyone felt like making small talk. Above some doorways, traces suggest that names or nicknames were posted, the ancient version of occupied or available, but handwritten and personal. It's a cramped building. The stone benches with mattresses would have felt hard. The ceilings are low. There's more noise here than romance. It is, in a word, work. The people who worked in places like this were not a single type, and that matters. Roman society had layers stacked on layers. There were high-status companions, educated, witty, careful about their clients, and very good at surviving dinner parties where the wine never stopped. There were freedwomen running taverns and small hotels, turning skill and savings into property. And there were enslaved people with almost no agency, hired out by owners who saw their bodies as assets to monetize. The same city that produced luxurious villas with peacock mosaics also stacked cheap straw mattresses in rooms you could cross in 2 strides. Contradictions weren't bugs, they were features. Roman law did not criminalize sex work, but it recorded it with the chilly neatness that Roman law loved. Registration could fix a person with the label infamous, the legal mark that stripped certain rights permanently. A free-born woman who registered or was registered could not later pretend it never happened in a courtroom or at a wedding contract. A man who sold his body likewise fell into that same gray zone. Enslaved people had no legal reputation to lose. They were exempt from dignity because dignity wasn't something the law granted them in the first place. Rome was blunt that way, harsh, efficient, considerate enough to write down the rules, inconsiderate enough that the rules favored the people writing them.
All of this might sound like a machine without feelings. It wasn't. The walls talk. Pompeii's graffiti is a library of human mood. Jokes, boasts, advertising, insults. Cramped poems written by someone on a break with terrible spelling and better heart. In and around sexual establishments, you find names paired with names. Little tags of so-and-so was here. And comments that, even when blunt, humanize the transaction. We'll keep it decent. We'll keep it non-graphic. It's enough to say that people wrote about being comforted, being disappointed, being broke, and being in love. Not often, but sometimes. And the sometimes tells you the most. Let's meet a property investor, because Rome loved men who loved margins. Picture a certain Marcus. There were a lot of Marcuses. It's practically the default. Respected, wealthy, with a well-trimmed beard that says, "I own 3 warehouses and an opinion about olives." He owns baths, a workshop, a couple of rental units near the gate, and a tavern with rooms out back. Is he a villain? Not particularly. He's a Roman who sees the city's appetites as a diversified portfolio. The same way elites invested in gladiator schools and amphitheater concessions, they also invested in the entertainment district's buildings. Public respectability and private profit weren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they went to dinner together. You'll often hear that Romans were free about sex. It's more precise to say they were intensely social about it. Everything tracked back to hierarchy. Who had power over whom shaped what counted as acceptable behavior. A free male citizen could buy services and keep his good name. If he sold them, if he crossed from buyer to bought, his reputation dimmed. A free woman in the trade lost rights that she could not easily claw back. Enslaved people, as ever, had their bodies run like businesses on someone else's account. It's a ledger, not a moral universe, which is Roman all over. Now, because this is bedtime, we are not doing lurid, but we can walk through space. The rooms in the Lupanar are small. The threshold stones are worn in a particular way, the kind of detail you notice when you move slowly, the way you tend to at night, with no one jostling you. The corridor is just wide enough for two to pass if both exhale. The wall paintings, famous for being explicit, make more sense as advertisements. They're simplified, stylized, a promise of options using symbols rather than text. Because when your clients come from 3 continents and know Latin only as the language of prices, pictures speed things along. A different building gives us a different world. A house in the better quarter with a reception hall, a garden, and a room that's less boudoir and more salon. Here a high-end companion receives. She's not anonymous. She chooses clients, negotiates terms, and is happy to be seen by a senator's friends in the right context. She has a shelf of scrolls for show and for use. Statues of Aphrodite and Venus mingle because syncretism was chic. She has a meticulous accountant, herself most likely. We flatter ourselves thinking modern professionalism is new. It's older than baked bread.
Some women in this line of work ran their own operations with business instincts that suggest they would have done very well in any era. One near the Forum, call her Iris because the name blooms in the graffiti more than once, appears to have run a mid-tier house with a courtyard and small rooms surrounding it. Clients came for wine and conversation first, for selection later. Her walls show painted scenes that are less catalog and more ambiance. She manages staff, keeps accounts, and posts support for candidates who will support protections for businesses like hers. Noise rules, bouncer laws, city patrols that actually patrol. People complain when nightlife is loud. They also complain when it fails to show up. A good manager works between those complaints. About the legalities. The Aediles posted ordinances. Stay off sacred precincts, keep a distance from schools, don't solicit near temples unless you enjoy paying fines. Respectable neighborhoods pressed to keep certain doors shut. Harbor districts pushed to keep them open. Taxes existed because of course they did, and fines could ruin you if you annoyed the wrong official. It's bureaucracy as morality. Draw lines on a map and you've drawn lines on behavior. Rome drew a lot of lines and printed them nicely. Exploitation sits on the same street as entrepreneurship. It always has. Enslaved workers endured conditions that brands today would describe as unacceptable, then decide not to fix. Small cells, long hours, owners with bottom lines for ethics. Some saved enough to buy freedom, an astonishing feat of patience and luck. Some never came close. The archaeology bears stress in bones, malnutrition, injuries, illness. We don't need to list, we don't need to linger. It's enough to know that the bodies had stories to tell when the ash finished their sentences for them. And yet, the human responses inside the system were complicated. Workers formed support circles. Jokes appear in shared spaces, the kind that only make sense if you were there the night the lamp fell over and set someone's cloak on fire. Small protective gestures show up in the material record. Extra blankets in one room, a stash of coins hidden in a wall crack, a necklace tucked in a floor urn because trust was a luxury and walls were more reliable than promises. You see agency in little acts, in prices negotiated, in clientele curated, in the refusal to serve a man who can't hold his wine because some boundaries are more valuable than a fee. A note about exotism because it comes up too often to ignore. Pompeii was a port and a crossroads. People from North Africa, the Levant, Greece, Gaul, and Iberia lived, worked, and made the city wider than its walls. Some sellers traded in mystique, the Egyptian seer, the Eastern enchantress, the Greek muse, stacking identity for marketing before Instagram could make it a lifestyle. For a few, the performance paid well enough to buy independence. For others, it was a mask worn because the mask sold. The letters and objects left behind in those houses sometimes show the strain of wearing a role for too long. The person under the costume gets blurry at the edges. It's profitable. It's exhausting. It's both.
The economy wrapped around this industry is spectacularly ordinary. Bakers supply bread to taverns. Wine merchants deliver amphorae with tidy tally marks on the neck. Clothiers sell sheets. Glaziers fix lamps. Apothecaries sell oils with labels that promise results they could not possibly quantify. Painters, the same men who decorate a wealthy atrium with myth scenes, paint brisk little panels above doorways nearby because a commission is a commission and bills do not care about the difference between Venus and a price list. If you follow the coin, you meet everyone. We could also talk hypocrisy with kindness. Senators thunder about morality in public while collecting rent from properties in the entertainment quarter in private. Priests urge purity and then invest temple donations in ventures that return a handsome yield because gods do appreciate fiscal responsibility. Matrons who would never walk down certain streets still wear jewelry whose silver came from profits made in those same streets. It's not uniquely Roman. It's human. We separate our hands from our pockets and pretend they don't touch. And then there's the final layer of context that always returns us the simple truth. This is all happening under a mountain that watches. It smokes sometimes. People are used to it. They patch walls after tremors and complain about plaster dust. They place a dish of fruit at a household shrine. They go back to work. I want you to picture a morning when tremors feel a little stronger but still within normal. In a courtyard like Esselina's, someone is checking the wine stock. In the Lupanar, a lamp is being refilled. In a quiet house uptown, a woman who has built a niche for herself is writing a short list of things to buy – oil, new sandals, fresh garlands. She will not get to the market. Most of them won't, but that is later. For part one, we hold the city in motion because it matters to remember it that way.
Before we go further, an important line. We are telling history, not making it salacious. Where the evidence is explicit, we'll be discreet. Where the people involved are young in a way that makes your chest tight, we won't describe. We'll acknowledge the harm, and we'll walk past respectfully. This is bedtime. We keep it humane. So what have we seen in this first drift? A city where sex work was not hidden in the way we might expect. A legal framework that wrapped morality around zoning and fees. A spectrum of workers from independent entrepreneurs to those with no freedom at all. A public that both condemned and consumed, often on the same day, sometimes at the same address. A dozen names scratched into walls remind us that the past belongs to individuals, not just systems. In the next stretch, we'll wander more deliberately, into registration and status, into how prices and protections actually worked, into the rooms where friendship formed in places designed for transaction, and into the soft murmur of personal notes that Ash accidentally archived for us. We'll meet a few people whose stories cross the city, and we'll stay gentle. No jumps, no announcements, just the steady rhythm of steps on stone. For now, let your breath settle. The lamps are low, the street grows quieter as afternoon leans toward evening, and then thinks better of it and lingers. The mountain is quiet, too, for the moment. We'll keep walking when you're ready.
Welcome back. Take a slow breath, maybe another sip of whatever you forgot on the nightstand. We're still moving gently, still keeping our steps small. Pompeii hasn't gone anywhere. The streets are warm, the lamps are steady, and the paperwork, as always in the Roman world, is ready to make an appearance, because of course it is. Let's ease back into the neighborhood by looking at the signs. Pompeii's visual language was rarely subtle. Phallic charms over doorways weren't shock art. They were protection and prosperity rolled into a cheerful symbol. Pray to fortune, ward off envy, and if your bakery sells more loaves afterward, well, who's complaining? Some signs pointed, some advertised, some just shouted good luck in terracotta. Modern visitors tend to lump every suggestive image into a single category. Romans did not. A painted scene could be a house's joke, a ward against the evil eye, or yes, a menu. Context mattered. The Aediles, the city officials with clipboards and opinions, cared very much about context, and so did your fines. About those Aediles, think of them as municipal babysitters with a love of lists. They posted rules about where certain trades could operate. Keep some distance from temples. Don't solicit by the school. Noise after dark? Expect a visit. The point wasn't purity. It was order. If your city runs on trade and travelers, you don't pretend desire disappears at sunset. You direct it to the right streets and you tax it. That's the Roman formula. A map, a ledger, and a stamp. Legal status was a kaleidoscope. People weren't just free or enslaved. They lived on a spectrum with sticky labels that clung for life. Registering as a sex worker put you in the category of infamia, legal ill fame, alongside actors and certain entertainers. It didn't send you to jail. It did close doors. Formal marriage to a respectable citizen, certain inheritances, the right to testify with full credibility. Enslaved people, meanwhile, didn't lose a legal reputation by working in the trade because the law didn't credit them with one to begin with. Owners dealt with Aediles, not enslaved workers. That cold neatness is very Roman. Efficient, surprisingly modern in its administrative mood, not exactly reassuring if you were the one being administered. How did money move? Coins, obviously, and at price points that tell you a lot about the strata of the business. Ancient graffiti in Pompeii lists sums that, translated into "what's that in bread?" suggest quick services could cost just a few asses, small change, while boutique experiences ran into denarii, actual dent-in-the-purse territory. You'll sometimes hear about little bronze tokens with saucy scenes called spīntriae, presented as Pompeian brothel coins. They exist, they're fun to look at, scholars argue about what they actually did. Gaming counters, bath tokens, a novelty series? The only rule here is don't build a grand theory on a pretty coin. Rome leaves us enough receipts without forcing the ones that won't behave.
Inside the workspaces, routine ran everything. Picture the Lupanar again. The task list quiet in the background, a doorkeeper minding who comes and goes, a lamp boy topping up oil, a cleaner with a bucket, and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who is done with ash and towels for the day. Rooms had stone benches with straw mattresses. Doorways had curtains, not doors, because doors were for houses and merchants, and curtains were easier to replace when someone left in a hurry. The paint above each room, little scenes in red and ochre, was not high art. It was a catalog, efficient and, in a way, polite. No one had to ask awkward questions. They could point. The paintings don't represent what always happened in those rooms. They represent what's sold. Graffiti makes the walls talk. We keep it decent. It's enough to say that some messages sound like transactions, some like jokes, some like tenderness. I was here with so-and-so, and she made me forget my troubles. Restituta, your voice is wicked. Successes was here, which seems optimistic as a personal brand. You can read snark in the script, and ego, and the kind of soft fondness that sneaks into a place designed for blunt commerce. People left proof they wanted to be remembered, even if it was just a name scratched with a dull stylus between appointments. Let's float from the cramped to the curated. In a better quarter, a high-end companion receives clients with the sort of hospitality that would impress your senator uncle. She has a garden with a tiny fountain, a small library, a good wine list, and the ability to keep a conversation going for hours without saying anything incriminating. She charges more. She sees fewer people. She picks them. She manages risk like a ship captain. Anticipate storms, avoid fools, work with reliable suppliers and discreet doorkeepers. When she supports a candidate for office with a neat line of painted endorsement on a wall, people notice. Azalina and the girls support X. It's not just advertisement, it's a reminder. We feed this city. Don't forget us when you post your next ordinance. Mid-tier houses sat between those poles. That's where Iris, a name that blooms in scrawled endorsements and in the Archaeology, seems to have worked. A courtyard for drinks, rooms around it, each painted differently. She managed more than a menu. She managed mood. Keep the wine diluted, the talk lively, the staff safe, and the patrons feeling chosen. It's hospitality, not just trade.
Her books would have stories to tell. Loans advanced, wages paid, bribes, let's call them fees, for inspectors with questions, small gifts for Aediles who liked candy more than conflict. The art on her walls was not just suggestive, it included symbols of protection, goddess eyes that watched doors and kept misfortune from creeping in. You can roll your eyes at the superstition. You can also admit that a room needs all the help it can get. Now a different kind of brand, the foreign mystique. Pompeii loved imported gods and myths. The Temple of Isis is one of the most lovingly preserved buildings in the city. Egyptian art, Nile scenes, priests in linen. A woman who shaped herself into the Egyptian seer. That's a marketing package that practically assembled itself. Exotic perfumes, fortune-telling, love filters, mostly wine and herbs with a good story. Did everything she offered work? No. Did it sell? Absolutely. For a few, the persona paid for freedom and a house in a quieter ward. For most, it was a costume worn long enough to become heavy. Letters found in houses like that sometimes shift between languages, Latin when writing to clients, Greek for friends, a smudge of nostalgia when talking about a river far away. Success and loneliness do very well together in tiny rooms.
We should talk about health without turning this into a lecture. Rooms that are too small, air that's smoky, water that's shared, and stress that never leaves, none of that ends well. Bones bear marks. Teeth tell stories of childhood hunger that never quite got mended. Healers did what they could with tools that worked sometimes, and faith did the rest. In larger establishments, you find evidence of makeshift care, a shelf with ointments, clean cloth set aside, a cup that only a few people used because hygiene was a community project long before anyone called it that. In small gestures, you can feel a stubborn insistence on dignity. A comb carefully stored, a bronze mirror wrapped in cloth. Things that say, I'm someone, not something. We've mentioned politics. It ran on favors and flourishes. As Selena's endorsements, the girls asking you to vote a certain way, these weren't oddities. Successful proprietors sponsored little repairs. They sat near candidates at festivals. They quietly paid for torches after dark to make their streets safer, and then made sure a scribe told everyone who provided them. Was that altruism? Partly. It was also lobbying. If you want the Aediles to spare your block when they redraw the red light boundaries, make yourself useful to the city. Rome loved utility almost as much as it loved marble. Let's talk price without spreadsheets. A quick encounter could cost what a loaf and a cup of wine might. Small coins counted out in a palm. A fancier experience cost more than a good dinner. If you have to ask, as the saying goes, you should bring more. Inflation existed. Festivals moved numbers. Paydays moved them more. Sometimes a patron ran a tab and paid in goods, a promise of fabric from a workshop, a discount on shipping, a favor to be called in later. The entertainment economy was all linked. The baker's brother knew a contractor who knew the yard foreman, who bought wine from a tavern that bought lamps from a shop next to the Lupanar. Money in Pompeii doesn't flow, it circulates. There's a generous myth that the Romans were uniquely shameless. It misses the point. They were uniquely systematic. What we tuck away in private or bury in euphemisms, they itemized. That system never erased the human friction inside it. Workers formed bonds. Consider a set of rooms near the amphitheater, where writing on the plaster shows a chorus of voices, nicknames, short lines of encouragement, a little poem with different hands adding verses over time. One stanza wishes freedom to a secunda, second-born probably because Roman names did what they said on the tin. Another teases a myrtus for charging properly. It's work. It's also life. People under a weight get good at lifting for each other. Exits existed, if narrow. A woman like Drusilla could save and pivot from a small room to a small tavern. That worked because she understood logistics, how to seat 3 tables and keep everyone fed, and how to direct travelers to places they were actually looking for, which paid goodwill forward with interest. Claudia Pregarina could open a shop selling fabrics and oils and hire others who wanted out of direct work.
Her accounts, if we had them, would probably show above-average wages and loans granted quietly, because people who have been squeezed are often careful about not becoming squeezers. The city's most elegant escapes are rarely elegant at the start. They're incremental. One less night, one more client you refuse, one more coin in a hidden jar.
What about emotion? It happens, because people insist on being people in inconvenient places. We have letters between a woman we'll keep calling Myrtus and an older client, Gaius Venustus, whose patience suggests he was a man who waited out storms and owned sensibly sized sandals. She wanted to leave, he wanted to help without pretending he didn't meet her in a room that most people pretended not to know. Their notes trade small kindnesses, advice on rent, a joke about terrible wine, a reminder to eat. He funds her tavern. She names him in a will, because family is sometimes a matter of choosing. It's not romantic in the epic sense. It's ordinary. That's why it matters. Religion wove through all of it. Priapus statues stood in gardens not to advertise a service, but to guard produce and bank luck. Venus Pompeiana, patron goddess, watched over love and fertility in a way that blurred the line between devotion and desire. The cult of Isis provided a community for freed people and foreigners in a city that smiled and then counted their coins. On certain feast days, the entertainment district slowed without stopping. Rituals mattered. So did rent. Two truths, no contradiction necessary. A word about the most famous building, the Lupanar, so it doesn't become the only building in our heads. There were other spaces, wine shops with back rooms, small hotels with discreet staircases, houses that became salons at night, and pop-up spaces that looked like residences but had a reputation after dusk. The city's entertainment economy wasn't a grain silo, it was a web. The Lupanar's fame comes from archaeology. It's intact, it's obvious, but the work happened everywhere that rules allowed and a door could be bolted. We should also say what we won't do. We won't turn suffering into spectacle, we won't pretend that exploitation was an accident, and we won't flatten everyone's experience into a single story. The same street held triumph and harm, friendship and coercion, savings and debt, prayers and profanity. That layered reality is oddly restful to learn at night. It lets us stop trying to make the past tidy. If you're still with me, eyes a little heavy, thoughts quieter, we can step into a day-in-the-life rhythm without raising the pulse. Morning at a modest house, sweep the floor, wipe the lamp soot, fold the linen that passes for a curtain. Check the wall niche where a little clay Venus sits with faded flowers. Aediles make their rounds, the doorkeeper gives a nod, and somewhere in the courtyard someone is laughing because a dog stole a fig again. The first clients are men who work the docks and start early and want their money spent before their boss sees their purse. The middle of the day is quiet. A scribe comes to read out a candidate's latest slogans. A woman in the back complains about her sandals. Someone tells her she can't wear the nice ones to work or she'll scuff them up. She ignores them and wears the nice ones anyway, because dignity is a shoe sometimes.
In the afternoon, in a better neighborhood, a different rhythm. A client arrives with a gift, a small bottle of perfume, and a promise he breaks lightly. He talks for an hour about business, which is a compliment to the woman listening. He pays double because she listened without yawning. He pretends not to notice the flattery because she has heard better. She does, however, note the supplier's name he dropped. It's useful to know who's importing tin cheaply this month. Information is a second currency in rooms where people let their guard slip. Smart proprietors collect it and spend it carefully. And because politics never sleeps, a painted endorsement appears overnight on a nearby wall. The girls of Asalina support, followed by a name that matters this week. It isn't just politics, it's security. If the man wins, the lanterns outside your door stay lit, and the patrol comes when it's asked. If the other man wins, you bring cookies to the guard's wife and hope for the best. Systems are about knowing who to feed. Let's quietly place the city's moral contradictions on one neat shelf before we drift on. Senators decry vice publicly and pocket rent privately. Priests urge purity and invest temple funds where the return is reliable. Respectable matrons scowl at the tavern and then send a maid to buy the good wine from the same owner at a reduced rate because we've been loyal customers for years. Is it hypocrisy? Certainly. Is it surprising? Not even a little. Rome's genius wasn't in pretending it didn't trade on appetite. It was in writing the rules that kept appetite inside predictable lanes. We're going to keep this calm so we won't tilt into the disaster yet. That day is coming in our story, but not tonight. For now, feel the city in balance. The mountain is quiet. The Aediles are satisfied. The lamp oil is fresh. Somewhere a worker named Prima writes her name on a wall, because sometimes being remembered is the only affordable luxury. Somewhere else, a woman tucks 3 coins into a crack behind a shrine and pats the plaster twice, because rituals calm the nerves better than thinking too far ahead. A freedman counts his ledgers and wonders if he should invest in a better counter and 2 sturdier stools. A door is bolted against the evening breeze and opened again because the room is too warm. The last thing to notice before we let the lights dim, in the city's entertainment district, solidarity often lived where the law did not. Workers pulled money for a colleague who was ill. A child in the rooms was whisked to a foster family outside the quarter because no one wanted him to grow up knowing only those walls. A former customer paid for a doctor because he'd been treated kindly on a bad day and it stuck. People shaped gentleness inside a hard system. Not enough to fix it, enough to insist that they were more than the sum of it. We'll keep walking in part 3, taking the same soft path. We'll zoom a little closer on the legal tags, the prices baked into graffiti, and the way politics ran through doorways like a patient river. Then, slowly, we'll follow a few names into the final hours. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but to see how people acted when everything that seemed complicated suddenly became simple. For now, close your eyes if they want to close. The lamps are out in most rooms. A last laugh drifts from a courtyard. The night is warm, and for a little while longer, ordinary.
Welcome back. Settle your shoulders, let your jaw relax. The city is still warm. The lamps are steady, and the streets of Pompeii have that late afternoon hush where conversations turn softer and scribes stretch their hands. If your tea's gone lukewarm, that's fine. The Romans drank a lot of room temperature liquids and seemed to thrive, or at least fake it convincingly. Let's drift toward the part of the story that Romans loved best. Rules. People think of Rome as marble and myth. It's also clipboards. The Aediles were the municipal managers with a taste for lists and an allergy to chaos. They didn't ban much. They categorized. Sex work wasn't illegal. It was registered. And registration was a magic Roman word that turned messy life into tidy columns. If you declared yourself a meretrix, a professional, you entered the column of infamy. It sounds dramatic. It was mostly administrative. Alongside actors, gladiators, and others who performed for a living, you lost certain legal privileges. Marriage with a respectable citizen? Complicated. Testifying in court with full credibility? Not ideal. Was this moral outrage? Sort of. Mostly it was Rome trying to keep social categories neatly stacked like amphoras in a warehouse. Predictability was the real virtue. Now, did everyone register? Of course not. Some worked under a different label to dodge the stigma. Taverns, inns, small hotels, copone and hospitia often doubled as social hubs where certain deals were understood without being spelled out. If you ran a respectable tavern that did brisk business after dark, you might list yourself as an innkeeper, an entertainment provider, a purveyor of snacks, or just a person with extra rooms, and hope the Aediles were in a tolerant mood. The Aediles usually were, provided your taxes showed up on time and your lamps didn't set the street on fire. Clothing signaled status, but not as strictly as later gossip suggests. You'll hear the claim that prostitutes wore the toga,
that garment of male citizenship, as a mark of social inversion. It's in the literature, and in a few scold speeches, it's also more likely a metaphor in many cases. Some probably did wear short, draped garments without the elite stola, because working life prefers practicality over ceremonial hems. Wigs, especially blonde ones allegedly made from German hair, were a thing. Cosmetics were too. It's not subtle, slathering on lead-based makeup that made you look luminous and also slightly unwell. Half the empire powdered itself and wondered why they felt tired. Fashion is expensive. So is basic chemistry literacy.
Architecture tells you what law could not. A purpose-built brothel, like the Lupanar, signals scale. Masonry beds, stone walls, a built-in latrine tucked where it needed to be. Mid-tier houses spoke hospitality, a courtyard for wine, rooms with frescoes that set a mood and politely described options. Taverns with back rooms hung curtains across thresholds because doors are loud and curtains are forgiving. Common details reappear: a niche for a household god, a basin for washing, a stack of lamps ready to relight the evening after the afternoon winds played tricks. The economics lived in scratches on plaster. Price lists show up in Pompeii, though they're fragmentary and casual. A quick encounter might cost a few asses, enough for bread and wine afterward if you were frugal. Something longer or more tailored drifted into denarius territory, where you had to think about dinner plans. Festival days nudged prices up the way holidays do anywhere. Paydays mattered too. You'll find references to 2 asses with garlands during a festival, which tells you more about mood than math. Barter happened quietly: fabric, wine, a promise of shipping, because services weave together where coins run thin. You may have seen those tidy bronze tokens with scenes that blush a little, Spintriae, as everyone likes to call them, presented online as brothel coins. They're gorgeous, they're mysterious, they are also not well-behaved evidence. They could be gaming pieces, bath tokens, or novelty currency with no fiscal duty at all. Scholars argue pleasantly. The safest posture is a Roman one: shrug, pocket the pretty thing, and don't write your business plan around it. People who ran these establishments had names in Latin with reputations that always sounded slightly damp. A lino, male, or lina, female, managed workers, rooms, and relations with neighbors who had thoughts about noise. Pimps were despised in literature, praised by their accountants, and occasional benefactors to candidates who promised to keep red lines where they were and patrols where they should be. Oversight didn't mean policing behavior in rooms. It meant making sure the alleys stayed passable, the lamplighters did their rounds, and the Aediles' cousin got the painting job when a fresher menu board was needed. Contracts happened in rooms with drawers and a very serious scribe. A tabellio could draw up agreements on wax tablets for hire contracts, room rentals, and the careful fiction of service provision that left everyone just enough plausible deniability to sleep at night. Manumission, freeing an enslaved worker, could be recorded in those same hands, sliding someone out of one legal category into another with a formula and a fee. The peculium, the personal savings an enslaved person could hold at the owner's discretion, was the miracle that made future plans more than prayer. It wasn't guaranteed. It was often honored, because stability benefits the person at the top more than the person at the bottom, and Rome was very good at protecting the top.
The earthquake of 62 CE scrambled Pompeii's property market in a way that nightlife notices first. Buildings fell, repairs lagged, gaps opened that clever people could step into. You see new construction of surprisingly specialized places. The Lupanar may date to post-quake years, and old houses repurposed into rental suites, baths, and entertainments. Julia Felix, a very real and very competent owner, posted an ad on her property, partly to rent, with baths, shops, and rooms, from the 1st of July to the 6th of August, if the terms please. The mood is brisk. She saw a need and turned her estate into modular income. It's not salacious, it's entrepreneurial. We should talk grooming, because half of Rome's economy seems to have been oil moving from one container to another. Unguents, perfumes, powders, and dyes traveled from Spain, Syria, and Egypt,
into small bottles that were either magical or placebo, depending on your optimism. Blonde was a look, achieved with wigs or with questionable chemicals, and a redder lip meant iron oxide more than youthful joy. Cosmetics weren't immoral. They were theatrical. Staging mattered. Scents, fabrics, lamps placed low enough to flatter a face that had been awake since dawn. Self-presentation was a craft. Workers learned it like any other trade, by watching older hands, swapping tips, and laughing at the latest miracle cream sold by a man in a hat who swore that Venus used it too. Religion threaded through everything. Shrines to Venus Pompeiana sat in courtyards with garlands and stale offerings. Priapus, guardian of gardens and abundance, lurked in corners with his eternal confidence, warding off envy and encouraging theft deterrents. The temple of Isis, long beloved by freed people and foreigners, soaked up prayers that had traveled by ship. People carried amulets, knotted cords, carved beans, little eyes, because protection comforts the nervous, and this business created nerves. Curse tablets, defictiones, turn up in wells and drains, inscribed in shaky Latin or confident Greek, asking gods to sour a rival's touch, to draw a lover back, to make a certain official develop diarrhea before his inspections. Cruel? Sometimes. Human? Entirely. If you walk through the amphitheater district on a day without games, you can feel the entertainment quarter catching its breath. Pompeii had infamously hosted a riot at the amphitheater decades earlier. Locals and visitors from New Sharia turned a sporting event into a brawl, and the emperor banned games for years because nothing says civic pride like an imperial timeout. When games returned, so did business. Houses in the theater quarter painted their exteriors more brightly, taverns restocked, prices flexed. Workers planned their week around the schedule posted in crude illustrations. No one needed to read. The sound of tools in the morning announced whether tonight would be a crowd or a trickle. Personal lives inside this economy were complicated without being cinematic. A freed woman like Drusilla, making her way out of direct sex work, did practical math. How many cups of wine to sell before a room could be paid for? How many friends she could hire without inviting resentment? How to manage a doorkeeper who liked to talk too much? She might send a portion of her profits to a foster family in a quieter ward because a child needed sandals. She, in turn, might receive an envelope of coins from a former client who preferred to be thought of as a patron now. In a system designed to sort people into boxes, the actual people kept slipping out of them.
Male sex workers existed, callboys in literature, attendants in bathhouses, musicians who did more than play, and their names show up less often because archaeology favors stone, and bathhouses are famously stingy with inscriptions that admit anything plainly. But a meal name paired with a price appears now and then in a scrawl near a thermae doorway. Economic patterns don't care about the gender of the worker so much as the predictability of the transaction. That predictability, who goes where, pays what, leaves when, was what the Aediles wanted most. It kept neighbors calmer and tax ledgers happier, which is the Roman equivalent of a contented purr. Because the city was small, politics ran on foot. Electoral programmata, public endorsements painted in red or black, lined the streets like polite yelling. The barmaids of Esselina support, followed by a name who promised lighting, paving, and fewer sudden raids that made everyone late for appointments. Did candidates court the entertainment quarter? Absolutely. Not because they were daring, because they were practical. A district that fed travelers and locals paid the city's bills. Elections were a kind of service review. You listed your candidate like you listed your best wine, reliably, loudly, and without shame. We can hover a bit over law again, without turning into a lecture, because the Roman legal machine is genuinely soothing in its bureaucratic confidence. The Lex Julia de Alderites, Augustan adultery law, policed freeborn citizens' sexual behavior, mostly targeting elite scandals. It wasn't written to cleanse the entertainment quarter. Aedilician edicts posted on boards handled that. Fines, multae, could be imposed for operating too close to sacred sites, for disturbing the peace,
for blocking a street with customers who forgot they had homes. Inspectors came by, hands behind backs, and observed. Warnings happened. Fees were paid. Business continued. If you want one more layer of texture, step into a supply shop. Lamps in neat rows. A boy melting pitch. A man weighing oil. A woman arguing elegantly about the quality of the wick because her staff shouldn't be relighting constantly like they live in a draft. A basket of cheap bronze rings for sale because customers misplaced them. A side shelf with tiny bottles of rose and myrrh. The owner's daughter watches everything and knows everyone's business because that's what daughters do when they're bored and clever. She will either run this shop in 15 years or marry someone who owns 3. We've talked a lot about women, as we should, but there were men in these rooms who weren't merely clients. A doorkeeper, Ostiarius, learned faces and sorted tension from harmless eagerness. A steward, Villicus, accounted for linen and lamps. A bodyguard stood in a corner at closing time to make sure no one got lost on their way out. They were part of the safety net that made a dangerous job less dangerous, not safe, but less sharp at the edges. Safety in Rome often looked like someone reliable in a doorway with arms folded.
Let's float gently through a day again, slower this time, following a few people who could have existed. Prima wakes early and writes her name in a tiny corner of plaster because sometimes a person needs to exist twice. She helpfully notes the date as the calends because she likes a tidy calendar. Iris counts cups and curses the broken handle she told a supplier about last week because she's not made of money. Isolina sketches an endorsement for a candidate whose nephew can fix the gutter, finally. A young man, call him Ganymede because narratives love a callback, tunes a lyre and debates whether the new perfume makes him smell like citrus or like someone who fell in a spice market. He decides it's fine. He's right. The day does not care, but his confidence helps. A scribe stops by to copy a contract onto fresh wax, rolling his eyes at a badly cut stylus and mumbling about apprentices these days. He glances at the painted scenes and pretends not to see them because he is a professional, and professionals are very good at hoping clients insist on being obvious. He leaves with 3 dates stuffed in his bag because the cook likes people who write neatly. In the afternoon, a small procession passes by on its way to a shrine. Flowers, smoke, the kind of singing that's a little off and therefore sincere. People stop at the doorways and watch. A worker touches a little amulet in her pocket and thinks about nothing for a blessed minute. The Aediles walk past later, nodding to the doorkeeper. The doorkeeper nods back. Their relationship is a symphony of nodding, and it keeps the street civil. At dusk, prices change. They always do. The air cools, and people who swear they were going home decide that one more cup will help them sleep. A woman who has been saving for months counts her coins and decides to treat herself to a new shawl instead of another lamp. She's right. It's red, and it makes her smile. Wrapping herself in color is a kind of prayer. We should be honest about the other side of the ledger. Not everyone in this economy had a way out. Some were held hard by debt, by owners who were very good at hiding their greed behind house rules, by sickness that kept hands from working and thus from earning. Solidarity softened the path. It didn't pave it. A stew of friends, patrons, and sheer stubbornness was the only recipe that yielded change. A few made it, many didn't. The city kept moving around them because cities do.
If you like quiet ironies, here's one. A city that categorized people so strictly also produced spaces where categories dissolved. In a courtyard with lamps, a senator and a sailor could sit within earshot of each other, pretending to be the only person in the world. A freedwoman could out-earn a petty aristocrat who spent his inheritance on imported tableware and eternal complaints. A doorkeeper could decide whether an afternoon ended peacefully or with a complaint that reached the Aediles like a sigh. That's power, even when the job title doesn't sound like it. A small aside about children, and we will tread very lightly. Some workers had them, not in rooms like the Lupanar if they could help it, but in the neighborhoods around. Foster networks took in infants whose mothers couldn't. A coin in a jar by a shrine might pay for milk. A former client might happen to deliver bread too often. People built small ladders out of kindness, and sometimes they were tall enough to climb. It is enough for us to know that such ladders existed and that they mattered. We can step back into the city-wide view now. After the quake, scaffolding leaned against too many facades. Fresh plaster glowed where old frescoes fell. Properties changed hands for less than their worth because their owners were tired, and new investors strutted because confidence is a skill. The entertainment quarter thrived in that long rebuild. If you rent rooms, you love itinerant stonemasons with sorebacks and coins to spend. If you sell wine, you adore plasterers who always come in pairs. If you manage workers, you learn the names of 100 men whose hands are whiter with lime than they were last week. We're not going to open the door to the final day just yet. We'll arrive at those last hours later with kindness and without spectacle. For now, the mountain is a dark silhouette doing nothing at all, which is everyone's favorite trait in a volcano. The city hums, which is everyone's favorite trait in a city. A woman in a better quarter writes a very short, very practical list and sets it by her door. Bread, lamp wicks, new hairpins. Talk to the Aediles clerk about that fee again. She will cross off 3 items and complain cheerfully about the 4th. Someone else, out in a busier street, scratches a heart by a name and feels better for it. The Roman system, register, regulate, record, wanted to make the world flat enough to walk on. Inside it, people still drew their own paths. Some paths bent toward independence, some circled back, some tangled into friendships that didn't appear in law, but mattered more than most laws. The quarter's noise softened at night into a kind of low comfort, sandals on stone, a closing door, the clink of a cup, the sleep sigh of a person who had enough coin for the next day and a little hope for the one after. We'll keep this pace in Part 4. We'll look more closely at the actual houses whose names appear in inscriptions, peek at the overlap between baths and bedrooms, and watch how elections and festivals choreographed the work week. Then, very slowly, we'll walk with a few people toward an ordinary morning that wasn't. No rush, no drama, just the steady rhythm of one life after another turning into history.
Welcome back. Let your shoulders drop. We're keeping the lights low and the pace lower. Pompeii is still humming along in that late, warm way. Someone just swept a doorway. Someone else is pretending to close, but won't. The mountain is quiet, which is exactly how we like our mountains. Tonight we'll keep wandering, and we'll do it the Roman way, with rules, rooms, and routines. No jumps, no drama, just the ordinary machinery of a city that turned appetites into schedules. Let's start with a house that wasn't a house anymore. Julia Felix, yes, a real person, posted what amounts to a classy rental ad on her property after the earthquake of '62. Baths, shops, rooms, garden spaces, if the terms please. It's practical poetry. She saw the post-quake shake-up and pivoted. Her estate along a busy street became a modular income engine. You could bathe there, rent there, talk business over oil and bread there, and, because this is Pompeii, continue your evening next door without anyone making a speech about it. Julia's ad reads like the headline of a woman who understood that faith and stability is nice, cash flow is nicer. Now a left turn to a familiar corner. The Lupanar sits where 2 narrow lanes meet, a purpose-built brothel, small cells with masonry benches and paintings above doorways. If you've seen photos, you know the palette. Iron-rich reds, creamy plaster, black borders. The frescoes aren't confession, they're catalog, a quick visual promise to a clientele that spoke many languages and preferred pointing to fumbling conjugations. The building is cramped. You can stand in the corridor and touch both walls with your fingertips if you take a generous breath. Yet the place is stubbornly orderly. A latrine tucked where it should be, a niche for a tiny household god, 2 floors to separate flows. It's not romance, it's logistics. A few minutes south, the Stabian baths, the city's oldest bath complex, rebuilt after the quake with the kind of confidence only Romans could warm their hands on. You pass through the apoditerium, the changing room, with its wall pegs and friendly theft warnings. You oil up because soap is still a gleam on the far horizon, then strigil off in the tepidarium. Heat in the caldarium loosens joints and other decisions. The frigidarium slaps sense back into you. Between rooms, you talk. Baths are where messages traveled without scribes. Workers caught clients here. Clients scheduled workers here. More than one evening's arrangement began under a painted ceiling, with steam misting the air and a bored attendant reminding everyone not to splash.
Bath staff had their own ecosystem. Capsari, cloakroom attendants, who learned faces faster than names. Elliptae, the oilmen, who knew everyone's shoulder knots and some of their secrets. A doorkeeper who looked too tired to fight, and therefore never had to. Their coins came mostly from entry fees, but tips made a quiet economy. It's not a conspiracy, it's courtesy, with a price. Because Pompeii loved a good election almost as much as it loved warm bread, the walls around busy corners shouted in red letters. Electoral programmata, painted endorsements, pile over each other like excited uncles at weddings. So-and-so supports so-and-so for Aedile. Housewives, guilds, tavern staff, even the muleteers weighed in. Pride and neatly lettered flattery rolled into one. Proprietors in the entertainment quarter were especially explicit. We, by name, support this candidate. Not a whisper, a declaration with a paint budget. The message under the message? We matter. We bring crowds. Keep our lamps funded and our lanes swept? Your vote count will thank you. Inside a mid-tier house, the kind that sat between purpose-built and palatial, you see the choreography that kept evenings smooth. A courtyard with a low table and a bowl of olives that always looks better than it tastes. A steward who tallies cups as if the gods themselves read his numbers. A doorkeeper, no one's fool, who can tell the difference between a welcome regular, a too-curious teenager, and a visiting official who would like to be invisible and will not be allowed. Workers call each other by nicknames that stick harder than lime mortar. A painted Venus watches from an alcove, garland slightly crooked because someone remembered to hang it and forgot to straighten it. It's a mix of ritual and pragmatism. Most work is. We could drift to the amphitheater district for a minute because Pompeii once tried to turn civic pride into a lively brawl. In the year 59, locals and visitors from a neighbor city traded more than opinions at the games. The emperor banned events for years. The entertainment quarter did not love that. You can feel how it would ripple. Theaters quiet, taverns underrun, houses that depended on crowds looking at their ledgers and sighing with theatrical sadness. When the ban lifted, business popped like a pulled cork. Prices went up in the discreet way prices always go up. Fresh paint appears on exterior walls because nothing says welcome back like a clean facade. Let's keep the pace and look at supply. Thermopolia, those hot food counters with embedded jars, stand open at corners like reliable uncles. Stew, cheap wine, bread, sometimes fish or sausages if the gods are feeling kind. Snacks and sex lived on the same street because appetite doesn't care about categories. Carters, masons, sailors, scribes – everyone needed something warm, salty, and quickly forgettable before they made bigger decisions. Regulars slip into back rooms through curtains that never quite close. Outsiders try the stew, nod politely, and move on. A boy, barefoot always, wipes the counter with a cloth that has seen better afternoons. He's invisible until he isn't. That invisibility is the city's secret workforce.
The legal frame hums underneath. Registration if you played it straight. Don't trade near schools if you preferred fewer fines. And a long list of places you shouldn't solicit unless you enjoyed conversations with Aediles. Fines exist, exemptions exist. The one thing no one tolerated – fires. Lamps had to be handled like sleeping cats. One careless wick could sour a whole street for a month. The irony of a city saved by ash and destroyed by it is not lost on anyone. But for now, the fire brigade is more worried about tavern lamps than lava. We'll put a pin in grooming, not too sharp, Because self-presentation was half the trade. Perfumes smelled like gardens on their best days and like ambitious resin on their worst. Cheap coals sulked in every box. Wigs were an industry. Blonde meant northern hair or a convincing approximation. Red hues came from iron. White faces from lead that quietly killed. Did they know? Some did. Some made a face at the headache and chalked it up to the weather. Rome loved beauty more than caution. That's not a Roman problem exclusively. Now a few names, softly. Fortunata, or lucky, appears often enough in Pompeii to feel like fate had a sense of humor. Secunda and tertia, second and third, say as much about family planning as they do about personal identity. Prima writes her name on a wall because it's nice to exist where you can see it. Myrtis scolds a client for haggling too aggressively, then laughs about it with friends later because boundary keeping is a skill. A Syrian woman gets mentioned not because Pompeii was an anthropologist's dream, but because foreignness sold. She leaned into a role, stacked it with the Temple of Isis's mood lighting, and made a living harder to get any other way. Some nights the role was a cloak, some nights a weight. Both can be true. We'll slide into the baths again because the overlap with evening work was real. Men went in groups, women in groups, times separated or rooms separate depending on the complex and the era. A cloakroom attendant guarded bundles with the intensity of a small god. He was still blamed if anything went missing. A scrawny kid with a scraper offered to clean your oil for a tip and practiced charm on everybody. Deals were made, gossip ran like water from one pool to the next. If you wanted to place a quiet advertisement for a house that needed more clients this week, you told the oil man. He told everyone. No fresco required. Under all this chatter, the city's pipes exhaled. Water towers fed street fountains, fountains fed mouths and buckets, buckets fed thermopolia and small rooms, and every latrine you wish we wouldn't discuss at bedtime. We won't, but it's worth saying. Cleanliness mattered here more than cliches admit. The better houses bragged about fresh linens and private washing basins, not because they were saints, because comfort sells.
Let's talk safety like adults who have decided to remain calm. A doorkeeper's real job wasn't intimidation, it was calibration. Who gets waved through? Who gets slowed down by a conversation that starts with, "How's your mother?" Who is quietly told we're full because his temper showed last time and no one here has paid enough to nurse his reputation. A bodyguard stood at the corner a few nights a week, not to be violent, to prevent it. He carried a club because swords invited paperwork, paperwork invited Aediles, Aediles invited rules. No one's favorite chain reaction. Midweek prices felt like the tide. Ships in port, up a little. Festival season, up more and in shorter increments because small bites hurt less. The Floralia, a springtime festival for flora, had a reputation for excess in Rome, and you can imagine how the theater district leaned into flowers and folly in a sea that rarely wasted a theme. Garlands were cheap, orators were cheaper, Venus's feast days were gentler on the eye, heavier on the purse. People paid for beauty and for a story about it. The quarter obliged. And about those stories, theatrical houses weren't just rumor. Some establishments built experiences that looked like miniature plays, masks for the shy, scripts for those who preferred to memorize their feelings. A lyre, a flute, a simple song. Myth scenes adapted to private budgets. A shepherd, a nymph, a goddess, a very persuasive mortal. It sounds absurd. It was also kind. For people who wanted to borrow an identity for an hour, theaters were crowded and expensive. These rooms were direct and affordable. Emotion isn't always about the object. Sometimes it's about the permission. On a quieter morning, you might find a scribbled prayer under all the other words. Not a curse, not a joke, just help me, private and small. Some workers kept private shrines with more candles than we might expect, and more gratitude than we assume. A good day was not drama. A good day was
Coin counted, no broken lamp, and 3 polite men in a row. The gods got thanked for fewer disasters more often than for grand rescues. Freedmen and freedwomen require a gentle paragraph because the city ran on them. Manumission, the legal step from enslaved to free, could happen by a public ceremony, a clause in a will, or a recorded declaration. A libertus stayed tied to a former owner by duty, opere, work obligations, and the kind of social bond that Roman law loved to keep tidy. Many freedwomen in this quarter kept working by choice, now on better terms. Some shifted sideways into taverns, shops, laundry services, cosmetic stands, or inns, using contacts earned the long way. When they posted endorsements for candidates, the paint felt extra firm. We belong, we vote, we hire. It wasn't revolution. It was local power.
The fillers deserve a friendly nod. They washed cloth with, let's call it, ingredients that Rome found abundant and free. Their workshops clapped and stomped cloth in vats and hung it to dry like bright flags. They made money off the city's vanity and its spills. The Phalonica of a certain Stephanus survives with a yard and basins and the precise aura of a place that both cleaned and absorbed gossip. Workers from the quarter brought linens here. Proprietors traded favors here. Someone always knew a guy here. The economy was not specialized, it was braided. Because we'd promised a flat glide and not a roller coaster, we won't dip into violence, but we will admit that harm existed and that people defended each other against it with the tools at hand. A warning word, an arm linked in a doorway, a regular told to come back tomorrow, a rival quietly supported because competition stops at the line where humanity starts. You can feel those lines in the archaeological crumbs that look like nothing. An extra blanket, a stash of bread crusts, a name repeated in 3 different rooms with 3 different adjectives, all warm. Let's walk a block on the main drag, the long spine of the city where carts scored the stone and every third doorway offered something hot. A painter leans on his brush, writing another endorsement in thick strokes. We recommend, followed by a name made of old syllables and new promises. An old woman sells figs with the authority of a priestess and the prices of a seasoned negotiator. A courier in a faded cloak reads an inscription aloud to a man who doesn't read, and both nod as if wisdom just happened. A dog naps in the shade of a shrine and refuses to move because he knows his importance, and so does the neighborhood. Inside a better house, a companion with an eye for the long game organizes the day. She refuses 2 appointments because reputation is a scarce resource. She sends a porter to the baths with a message for a client that sounds like regret and is actually scheduling. She replaces a wilting wreath with a fresh one, not for the gods, but for herself. She has a book of accounts that could make a senator blush with envy at the margins. She is not an exception. She is one kind of professional among many, and she knows the city better than most men who claim to run it. The small contraptions of control, locks, latches, bolts, carry the weight of safety that we don't need to explicate. A door that actually closes matters in a city where most things are open by default. A window that opens only from inside matters more. Neighbors notice who has what. They share tips on carpenters who don't overcharge. Ideally sigh when they see clever hardware because they know very well that they'll never get a bribe from the person who installed it. Practical detail is politics, just lower to the ground. We can visit a shrine because belief is the only luxury that costs the same in every quarter. At the Temple of Isis, a charming complex rebuilt after the quake with care, music and incense smooth the edges off a hard morning. Freed people and foreigners feel at home here. The goddess famously doesn't check family trees. A woman from the quarter leaves a small offering, a ribbon, a coin, a whispered name, and goes to work with marginally lighter hands. Call it placebo, call it miracle, call it habit. Rome didn't care what you called it if it kept you walking. One more small thing that matters: time.
There were hours when the quarter worked and hours when it watched itself. Past a certain point at night, regulars deal with regulars only. It's not written down. It's enforced with eye contact and a remarkable ability to be busy at exactly the right moment. This is how places stay alive. Rules need not appear on tablets to be real. Now, a circle back to where we began tonight. Julia Felix and her ad. Her rooms and baths draw in a cross-section of Pompeii that makes the entertainment quarter look less like an island and more like a peninsula. Merchants finishing a deal in a warm pool. Workers easing a back that shouted at scaffolding since dawn. A woman counting rent in a shaded loggia, while someone in the street below sells roasted chickpeas to a boy who should be home. The line between respectable and intimate neighborhoods is a paint stroke, not a wall. Coins walk from one to the other without guilt. If you listen, you hear the city's two heartbeats. The public rhythm, forums, elections, festivals, courts, and the private rhythm, kitchens, baths, courtyards, small rooms with curtains. The entertainment quarter lives where those rhythms overlap. That overlap is not an accident. It's a design feature. Rome's gift to itself was the ability to codify the overlap without pretending it didn't exist. We'll keep our promise and stay in the ordinary for now. Tomorrow will be another day of small exchanges and practiced glances, a fresh line of paint, and a new crack to patch and plaster. A child will learn to read letters on a wall by spelling a candidate's name out loud, and someone will clap, because learning is cute, even when the politics isn't. A worker will tuck 2 coins into the little hollow behind a shrine and tap the plaster twice because rituals are muscle memory. A doorkeeper will pretend not to see a kindness because seeing it would make it less graceful. We'll step into the last stretch of calm in Part 5. We'll map the festival calendar to the quarter schedule, wander the forum baths at a quiet hour, and watch election week as a logistical ballet with fresh chalk, extra lamps, and prices that rise just enough. Then, very gently, we'll let the morning of ash arrive in the distance like a gray line on a blue horizon. Not to frighten, just to witness. For now, lamps out, doors bolted. The street murmurs. Pompeii sleeps the way old cities do, lightly, with one eye open and a hand on the latch.
Welcome back. Let your breath settle low and slow. The lamps are soft. The city is in that comfortable pre-evening exhale when errands are done badly and proudly. If your drink went tepid again, Rome would approve. Their beverages rarely bothered to be hot or cold. They were efficient, like everything else here, except maybe the politics. Tonight, we'll let the calendar unroll itself. Pompeii kept time with markets, festivals, and a very practical sense of when people were likely to have spare coin. The entertainment quarter adjusted itself to that rhythm the way a shopkeeper turns a sign from closed to "we never really close" without moving. Start in spring, when the air forgives and flowers overcommit. The Floralia arrives with garlands and a reputation. In Rome proper, it was famous for theater that preferred cheek to tragedy. In Pompeii, the theater district stepped into the role enthusiastically. Painted notices went up a week early, bright as new sandals. Thermopolium stocked extra garlands because nothing says, "I am very festive," like wearing plants. In houses that sold company along with wine, prices smiled upward in small, carefully measured steps. Not gouging. Just, "we value your enthusiasm," in coin form. Performers wandered. Songs got louder. Aediles posted a reminder about decency that everyone read and then used to wrap olives. A few weeks later, another thread, the Venalia, sacred to Jupiter and Venus, a festival about wine that somehow managed to be about everything else as well. Vine growers gave thanks. Drinkers made vows they intended to honor in spirit, if not in schedule. Houses in the entertainment quarter hung fresh wreaths for Venus and restocked the better amphorae.
Lighter wines for daytime, sturdier ones for it's late but not late enough to leave. If you were counting coins, these days were gentle tides, predictable swells, easy to plan around. Workers took turns resting because the calendar did not. In early summer, the heat started polishing people. That brought more evening business and a different tone in rooms where lamps lived. Breezes mattered. Courtyards competed for most shade with potted laurel and the occasional sheet hung from a pole, because architecture only takes you so far. You can hear the creak of pulleys hoisting water jars, the clink of oil flasks, the murmur of negotiations about who takes the early watch at the door and who gets the late one with fewer visitors and more yawns. Routines breathed.
Autumn had its own cadence. Harvests came up from nearby villas, and with them, tips improved. Men from the countryside brought produce and stories, and a desire to be treated as if distance from the forum were not a moral failing. The quarter obliged, as long as the stories weren't longer than the wine lasted. The festival of Venus Pompeiana drew processions near the temple, neat lines of worshippers with modest offerings and sincere requests. Workers stopped to watch from doorways. Some stepped out with a small coin for the collection and a quick silent wish. Not for miracles, for fewer annoyances and steady work. The sort of things even gods enjoy granting because it makes everyone look competent. Saturnalia sat in winter like a patch of chaos in a tidy field. Role reversals, gifts, fewer rules pretending to be many. In the big cities, it could feel like a cheerful coup. In Pompeii, it felt like a long party with extra theater and slightly more tolerance from officials who knew how to read a calendar. Houses raised their prices less than you'd think, because holiday goodwill evaporates if you charge double. Better to sell more wine and less drama. Workers wore little caps, clients wore bigger smiles. The doorkeeper practiced his "we're full" speech with festive flair. It was fine. It ended. Everything snapped back into the lanes Rome loved. Between festivals, the week turned on market days. The forum filled. Fish from the sea with a precise expression of fish everywhere, vegetables arranged in careful pyramids, garum vats announcing themselves to anyone within 50 steps. The entertainment quarter loved market days. Travelers who had come for supplies needed directions, advice, and company while they weighed whether to buy the good olives or the sensible ones. Houses sent a runner to the stalls at dawn for bread, fruit, and gossip. The runner returned with a basket and 2 new roomers. The better roomer determined the evening's conversation for regulars who pretended they didn't come here to talk. Let's float into the forum baths at a quiet hour. The big complex breathed like a machine. A potitarium full of bundles and warnings to watch them, tepidarium with its steamy lull, caldarium with its slap of heat that made promises to old joints. The quiet hour belonged to those who liked to hear their own thoughts without the echo of 40. An older man with a scar that told a story you'd have to ask him to hear. A woman who ran a small shop and used this hour to move her shoulders without counting. A boy whose job was to oil people and pretend he was not listening. Deals happened in the corners. Meetings were set for later. The baths were pipelines for words. If you wanted to adjust your schedule in the entertainment quarter, you told the right attendant, and the right people found out before the hot room cooled. Staff knew that rhythm intimately. Capsari, cloakroom attendants, remembered who tipped and who told stories they had heard before. Elliptae, oilmen, remembered which oils soothed whose muscles. A doorkeeper who looked like a statue of patience recognized everyone who was likely to start trouble and everyone who was likely to end it. Their names don't survive in inscriptions. Their function survives in how smoothly the city ran when it wanted to.
We can lay down a map of the election season next. Endorsements appeared on walls in tidy rows, red letters that dried to a soft brown in the sun. We the barmaids of support this man. We the fullers of support that one. Muleteers, fishmongers, guilds whose titles sounded heroic and smelled like labor. Homes and shops offered their walls as canvases. Workers in the entertainment quarter made their endorsements loud on purpose. If you're frequently forgotten, you raise your hand with paint. A Selena's girl signed their names under a candidate's and then handed out watered wine to anyone who nodded approvingly.
This is called political engagement. It is also called advertising. Rome approved of both. Election week meant choreography. Torches for evening rallies, ordered ahead and paid for with a mix of coin and promises. Extra lamp oil because speeches run long. Clean tunics for staff because presentation signals confidence. A bodyguard hired from a colleague's cousin because someone always shouted too much on market day and wanted to shout some more at night. Houses planned for the surge and the slump. On voting day, things quieted. People wanted to be seen in serious places. The quarter respected that, cleaned its thresholds, and prepared for the aftertalk with a slight discount on wine if the wrong person won. Supply chains looked every day, which is to say, they were quietly miraculous. The entertainment quarter needed what all businesses need: reliable goods, in the right amounts, delivered before anyone had to ask 3 times. Lamps and wicks, wine and water, salt, herbs, beans, olives, bread, textiles that endured washing, oils that didn't smell like regret. The Fullers were half laundry, half rumor hub. Their vats worked and their courtyards listened. Deliveries were timed to miss the sloppiest traffic and the worst sun. A failure in supply rippled. Fewer lamps, shorter hours, stale bread, grumpier staff. It is not glamorous. It is how cities survive. Step into one mid-tier house and watch the schedule. At the top of the day, pinned by the door with a piece of bronze that used to be part of something more expensive. Names assigned to watches, to cleaning, to the door. The steward has a wax tablet with notches along the edge where "Don't Forget" lives. Aediles fee, fuller's bill, lamp oil low at the annex, talk to the carpenter about the latch. The carpenter will arrive 2 days late, declare the latch perfect, and then replace it anyway because carpenters do not blanch at paradoxes. Everyone will approve along a spectrum from fine to as long as it works. Let's sit with a few familiar shadows. Prima walks early under a sky that still decides whether it cares. She buys bread while it's still warm and pays a little extra because the baker's daughter is trying to marry someone who insists he is a poet. She rolls her eyes and leaves 2 extra coins anyway because happiness that cheap is a bargain. Iris, as manager, stands in a doorway with a ledger, practicing the facial expression that says no without being unkind. She will perfect it by midday. Asalina drafts another endorsement and sends her runner to the baths to read it aloud dramatically while not mentioning her name. The runner will mention her name. Drama requires credits.
Someone, inevitably, has stayed too long and owes too much. The house handles it with habitual grace. A reminder here, a smaller portion there, a quiet word to the man's friend that perhaps he should escort him home. No public shaming. That is bad for business and worse for sleep. Reputation, for everyone, is measured in stories, and people remember the gentle ones longer. Let's walk the quarter on a festival day when the forum is draped with banners and merchants shout in the way only men with good lungs and bad sense can. The amphitheater hosts a performance. The theater district puffs itself up like a happy bird. Prices are slightly higher, portions slightly larger. A music maker sits in the shade of a doorway, plucking a tune. A child dances inexpertly. A woman claps with the kind of grin that forgives any rhythm. A group walks by in borrowed laurel, the leaves wilting faster than their stamina. The Aediles clerk shakes his head at a painted advertisement that is definitely too close to a sacred precinct and decides not to make it his problem today. Mercy is also bureaucracy. We can say something brief about safety one more time, because it is the quiet scaffolding of every scene. Door policy shifted. Some nights were regulars only, enforced with the smile of a doorkeeper who knew how to make a denial sound like a favor. Bodyguards lingered or vanished depending on the day's mood. The best defense always was routine, predictable hours, predictable staff, predictable cues that someone was not acting like himself. When cues blared, the house dimmed, deals ended early, a door closed faster. If the city's a stage, The best performances are the ones where no one notices the stagehands. And now, the bath complex again, late morning on a day with no festivals. A poet recites in a corner to four men who have heard better and like this one anyway. A worker with a shoulder that won't stop arguing lets the oil man do his job. A woman scolds her friend for spending too much on perfume and then asks for a dab. They both laugh, and attendant rolls his eyes the way attendants have from the beginning of time. The air hums softly. It is so ordinary, it's almost luxurious. The city is not a museum. It is a pattern. The entertainment quarter is the densest weave of that pattern because it touches money, appetite, and reputation at once. You can judge it if you want, but if you pull its threads, the rest starts to fray in ways the form does not like to admit.
And then, without rushing, we can admit that sometimes the pattern twitched. A small tremor, the kind that rattles a lamp for a second and gives everyone a shared excuse to pause. The region lived with these like people live with noisy neighbors, annoyed, then forgiving. After the big quake in '62, minor ones were background noise. Cracks got plastered, shrines received extra flowers, someone muttered about the mountain like an old relative who refused to move. Life, stubbornly, continued. One morning, clear with clouds that minded their business, you might have noticed a dusting on the horizon that wasn't dust. A thin line, more suggestion than event. Birds were louder than usual, or perhaps you were listening more closely because you could smell sulfur faintly and decided it was just the fish market practicing. You went to the baths anyway. You ate your bread. You arranged your courtyard. You told the doorkeeper to set one extra lamp aside because the Aediles' nephew promised a visit. The nephew did not come. He will later pretend he did. That's politics. Inside a small house, someone, call her Fortunata, counted coins into a clay jar and tucked it behind a tiny Venus, tapping the plaster twice. Habit is balm. Across the way, a bodyguard checked the club near the door and yawned. A runner tied a message to his belt and said out loud that he would definitely not stop at the bakery. Then stopped at the bakery. In the forum, two candidates' men painted over each other's endorsements, nodding curtly in mutual acknowledgement of pointless effort. The baker's boy took a deep breath and decided he would become a scribe, because paint made his arms tired. In the Lupanar, oil lamps were trimmed with practiced hands. Curtains were brushed. A joke was shared without heat. The latrine's water burbled its indoor river noise. On the wall, a new name scratched small beside others. Not big, not a love poem, just, I was here. The most human sentence in any language. It will be there for a long time, long after anyone remembers the face behind it. The ash will see to that in time. But not yet. We are not there yet. We are still in the ordinary. A procession passes a block away, far enough to be music, close enough to be a reason to straighten a garland. The temple bells at Venus give their soft, square note. A breeze pulls a curtain. Someone puts a stone on the hem to keep it honest. The mountain sits exactly where it always sits, just a little taller than memory, quiet enough to be ignored deliberately.
At day's edge, the quarter took stock. Bread, gone. Wine, acceptable. Lamps, enough to last the night. Staff, tired, but the good kind. The steward scratched 2 lines on his tablet. Fuller's bill next week. Talked to the Aediles clerk before the festival because someone forgot the last time and paid twice. He smiled in the way a man smiles when he has a job he can do and prefers it to the ones he cannot. Let's tell a quieter story within the quiet. A small network of women who once worked directly in the trade now ran side businesses near the amphitheater. One sold cosmetics and perfumes, cheerful about her inventory's tendency to evaporate or stain,
One ran a small hotel that served couples who needed privacy and didn't require moral commentary with their keys. One ran laundry with a mother's lecture built in, free with every order. They watched out for each other the way people who remember watch out. When business ran thin, they traded clients, not barbs. When business ran thick, they handed work off rather than hoard. It looked like cooperation because it was. They had learned that survival was easier when you had someone to drink bad wine with at the end of the day. Their quarter had a dozen men like that bodyguard at the door, ex-gladiators with calm eyes, cart drivers who had seen too much road, former sailors who had opinions about rope and women and everything else. They did favors without recording them, though everyone remembered. That memory was worth more than contracts in a pinch. We can close this evening with the forum again. Just as stalls begin to shudder and someone starts sweeping in that rhythmic way people do when they're thinking. A dog noses a scrap. A child who should be in bed recites a candidate's name he has learned from a wall. His mother pretends not to be proud and fails beautifully. The sky smears itself toward darker blues. A man in the entertainment quarter lights the first lamp, then the second, then the third. He does it every night in the same order because the order matters to his hands, if not to the gods. We'll keep the lamps low in part 6 and follow the last ordinary hours with the same even step. We'll watch how the entertainment quarter prepared for an evening that never finished, how the city's rules met a morning that did not need them, and how the small rituals of a hard trade turned into the small kindnesses we still read in Ash. No rush. We'll let the quiet arrive first. Then we'll stand at the edge with the same soft voice. For now, rest. The doors are bolted. The calendar has turned one more page without complaint. The mountain is only a shape against the night.